All right, welcome and good morning, everyone. Great to see you all. On behalf of the entire faculty and staff, welcome to the Weitzman School of Design in Meyerson Hall's Plaza Gallery. I'm Catherine Sievett, Chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture and Meyerson Professor of Urbanism. I also serve, along with our Dean Fritz Steiner, as the Faculty Co-Director of the McHarg Center for Urbanism and Ecology, our department's flagship faculty research center. We're delighted to have Rebecca Popowski serving as the new Wilkes Family Director of the Center, both supporting and broadcasting the work of our faculty and students. The McHarg Center is delighted to host today's Proxy Landscape Symposium, expertly convened and curated by my colleague, Associate Professor Gerard Pietrusko, and moderated by three of our landscape architecture graduate students, Kelvin Vu, Gabe Weber, and Mel Bleeker. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our 10 guest speakers, hailing from various disciplines and landscapes, both near and far from our campus. They are collectively designers, historians, anthropologists, archaeologists, policy experts, writers, artists, and theorists. The discussions today will explore how specific landscapes may act as test sites for remote locations, as dynamic sites that record the stories of their very formation, and as indicator sites that reveal hidden processes and transformations. As we think about these sites and non-sites, I'd like to acknowledge the ground and landscape upon which we are situated here at the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, known as Coaquinock by the Lenape peoples, and to state the very place name of this location, the place of large shells. We occupy a place and a moment in time along the greater Lenape-Hoking, and I wonder and hope that this landscape and territory is so much more than a proxy of what it once was, and that we learn to see it as ever-present and ever-emergent, vibrant ground. A few words of introduction for the convener of Proxy Landscapes, Gerard Pietrusko. Bobby's research, practice, and teaching focus on the history and speculative design potential of environmental media. Pietrusko embodies transdisciplinarity and the expanded field of landscape practice, having earned a Bachelor of Music in Music Synthesis from Berklee College of Music, a Master of Science in Electrical Engineering from Villanova, and a Master of Architecture from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. His design work, produced under the name of his studio, Warning Office, has been exhibited at the MoMA in New York, the Fondation Cartier in Paris, and multiple editions of the Biennale Architettura di Venezia, including new work appearing in the 2025 exhibition in Venice this May. Recordings of his sound art have been released by famed experimental labels Room 40 and Line. I'm quite sure he is the only member of the Weitzman School of Design who can be found on Spotify. A beloved member of our department's teaching faculty, he was awarded this year's G. Holmes Perkins Teaching Award for Excellence in Teaching, based on nominations from students of the Weitzman School of Design. This is a great honor, and many congratulations on that, Bobby. I'd now like to invite Rebecca Popowski, the Wilkes Family Director of the McHarg, to say a few words about the McHarg Center and some of our upcoming events, and then we will cede the floor to Bobby to introduce the Proxy Landscapes Symposium. Welcome again, anyone, and please enjoy today's program.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine. As Catherine mentioned, I'm Rebecca Popowski. I'm the new Wilkes Family Director of the McHarg Center. It's really great to be here. Thank you, everybody. The McHarg Center is a platform that supports design and planning research among faculty and students. And ultimately, our goal is to support life on Earth. So what the McHarg Center does here in the school, we have varied ways of thinking how that platform platform works. But convenings like today are really truly central to what the McHarg Center does and what the McHarg Center has done kind of in amazing ways over the past few years. It's been inspiring to see and to take part in some of the conversations last night, this morning, and to really get a sense of how meaningful it is to have, communities of practice come together in spaces like this to share and to grow new ideas. We can already feel that happening. So thank you so much for joining us in this. I'd like to just share a few upcoming events. I hope that you'll find that the McHarg Center will be quite active over these final few weeks of the semester and also over the summer, so please stay tuned. We have an event, kind of a celebratory year-end event on April 22nd, which is Earth Day. It's an event called Greetings from Earth, and this is really meant to be a time to pull together a lot of the brilliant and active student researchers and faculty researchers here in the landscape department in active dialogue. That should be a lot of fun. We also have a lecture coming up from the 2025 McHarg Fellow, Leah Kaler, who is wrapping up her one-year fellowship at the McHarg Center. Leah has been an incredible member of this community over the course of this year as a teacher and a researcher, and so she'll be really presenting a beautiful body of work on April 24th. That's at the Kleinman Center as well, so please join us to listen to what Leah has to say. I also just want to share that there will be, over the course of the summer, a lot of sharing that happens through the McHarg Center through a new digital platform, which is called Perspectives. So please keep an eye out for that. We'll be able to share some of what comes out of this event, and also a lot of the ongoing research that faculty are undertaking right now in the center. So please keep an eye out for the McHarg Center Perspectives. Finally, I would just like to welcome and congratulate Tammy Bond, who is our brand new McHarg Fellow for 2025-26. We're incredibly excited for Tammy to join us. She's a brilliant practitioner and researcher, and we're just couldn't be more happy to have you, Tammy. So thank you. I'd also just like to give my sincere thanks to Bobby Pietrusko for organizing this event. What a brilliant set of speakers and conversations. I can't wait to hear it. Thank you to the department, and also especially to the students who you'll see moderating these sessions today. It's going to be a great conversation. Thanks, Bobby.
Hi, folks. This is good. This is nice and informal. I'm just gonna pile on some additional thanks. I want to thank Aaron and Ray for, behind the scenes pulling together all the logistics. They've kind of made this go off without a hitch. I think also for the guests joining us, the density of emails you probably have gotten from Erin communicates how on the ball she was with this. So it's been great, and so glad all of you got here in one piece with no detentions. All right, so moving on. So to introduce today's session, I'm going to share a few historical episodes that I feel have contributed to the formation of the landscape proxy concept as I understand it. The content of today's session and the work of our guests reaches far, far beyond these episodes that I'm going to share. And it expands the idea of proxies in scope, scale, and theoretical nuance. But I hope my historical episodes will create a point of departure for understanding the relationship between the work of our guests and what I feel are, or at least should be, foundational case studies for understanding the connections among landscape, media, and epistemology. Those of you who are familiar with my work know that for the last several years, I've been developing the concept of what I call vegetal media. And through this concept, I've tried to understand how the landscape is conceived of and read as an information source. And I use that term information in a very specifically kind of mid-century way that's still with us today. Or said another way, I'm interested in transforming the field's current interest in representations of landscape. We all love these kind of turns of phrase, but it actually works for me here. Representations of landscape to questions of representations as landscape. So how do we have landscape do the work of representation for us? But moving back from the mid-century context that I'm going to present, let's start somewhere else. Let's start here. And I'm going to talk about a few different concepts. So analogous areas 1, or the tableau physique. Many of us know this drawing. It's the Chimborazo volcano in Ecuador. And in 1807, German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt published his Essay on the Geography of Plants, which included his famous tableau physique that we see here, famous now, but also quite famous when it was first published. And in this drawing, Humboldt offered a cross-section of Mount Chimborazo from sea level to the summit. Elevations were marked along the vertical axis with clearly indicated altitudinal zones. Against this backdrop, he depicts the names of hundreds of plant species located at the altitudes at which Humboldt observed them during his fieldwork. These are then delineated by vegetal zone classifications, starting with tropical rainforests at the base, temperate forests, alpine tundra, and then ultimately the snowline and barren summit. Humboldt then implies a correlation between altitude and other important natural phenomena. So we have temperature gradients, atmospheric pressure, humidity levels, cloud formations, weather patterns, as well as things like barometric pressure and even the boiling point of water at different altitudes here. Many environmental factors like these that naturalists and geographers might draw and compare on the two-dimensional expanse of a map, Humboldt drew these in section, and indeed this was his intent. Altitude, i.e. elevation, could be used as a proxy for other regions on the globe. Or to put it in Humboldt's words, he says very cleverly, climbing a mountain is like traveling north. Ascending a mountain's elevation mirrors the shift in vegetation zones and climates experienced when traveling from the equator towards the poles, where altitude became a proxy for latitude and its various changes in climate and soil, all mediated by the indicative plant species of vegetal media. Humboldt also did depict things at the global scale. So here's Humboldt's famous isocline map, where he rendered climactic regions of the globe as individual categories. He depicted the world in this way, classified regions with the same characteristics, and demonstrated the way that local elevation might stand in for expansive territory, or just as easily as we see on a map like this, that one region might stand in for another region climactically. For many geographers later, boundaries among these different regions were often indicated and defined by vegetal cover. So the relationship between climate and vegetation flipped back and forth in terms of which one gave evidence of the other. As historian David Blackburn describes, Humboldt radically jumped scales and used highly local observations in his fieldwork to produce global scale information. Chimborazo was a terrestrial and climatological microcosm, a proxy for the global environment. Now, jumping ahead 100 years, I want to consider another set of examples that I think are relevant to the discipline, and these are kind of giving us the poles that I think will frame some of the conversations we're having today. We might consider the work of two other naturalists. We'll say late naturalists because, you know, it's a little, the period's a little off. We have the agronomist Homer Schantz and his collaborator, plant ecologist Frederick Clemens. While Clemens is well known to a landscape audience, Schantz is not, and I'd like to put him on our radar. Homer Schantz was crucial for the development of the plant indicator concept. That is, the idea that the presence of particular plant species and their physical manifestation could be read as a signal, as an indicator of the environment in which it was situated. And specifically, that plants indicated those aspects that are difficult to observe directly in a single moment. So for instance, by reading the presence or absence of certain plants, one could infer underlying soil type, moisture availability, such as hidden groundwater, chemical properties, general climate, recent weather, and a history of land degradation. With a proper sensitivity, one can observe the presence of particular species and their physical configurations and know much about the superficial and subsurface landscape in which they reside. These ideas were most famously distilled by Frederick Clemens, and though less discussed and theorized than his concept of plant succession, which is certainly famous for, the indicator concept was equally important for Clemens personally in his thinking and in his writing. Though Clemens systematized the concept and is therefore sort of attached to this idea, he traced its historical roots, he included Humboldt, but he also gave Homer Schantz the most credit for developing the idea in a contemporary fashion, and for contributing significantly to Clemens's own ideas of plant succession. Okay, so crucial for the development of this indicator and successional idea was a theory of temporal change, or at least coarsely, if not a full temporal theory, at least the idea of before and after. And it was Schantz's use of photography that gave both succession and indication their temporal logic. Over the course of his career, Homer Schantz took roughly 10,000 photographs of the landscape and repeatedly traveled to locations in the American Great Plains, various countries in Africa, and the Sonoran Desert, among others. He would later return to the same sites and the same vantage points and photographically document their vegetal change as a before and after situation. He also measured changes in the soil and climate and correlated these together. Now, keep in mind, this is very early in the history of photography. We're looking at photos here in 1907. I know I'm talking about before and after, and I've showed you an animation. I kind of like missed the boat here. These are not the same site. These are actually two different photos. So it seems perfectly obvious what I should have done, but you only iteration number one. But anyway, we've got two of his photos, and we can see very clearly how vegetal cover seems to be responding to a strict change in something that's happening subsurface in both of these photographs. But anyway, we already see how media about the landscape, right, these photographs, is used to turn the materials of the landscape itself into a media as indicators. And this is a theme I return to again and again, the cyclical, almost dialectic relationship between media of landscape and the landscape as media. And I think this is crucial for the proxy concept. And some of this came up certainly in Susan's lecture last night. Okay. I'd like to just show quickly two additional maps by Shantz, because in addition to being a photographer, he contributed significantly to the cartographic representation. Here are two maps by Shantz. They were both made in 1923. The first, the natural vegetation of the US, which was one of the outcomes of his photographic expeditions. The second is the vegetation map of the entire continent of Africa, also done in 1923. Incredibly prolific. Now, we should consider the caption, though, on this map, written quite small, but it captures, the caption captures one of the kind of main things about Shantz's work. So I'm just going to read it as a quote. And this is here it is. The differentiation of the soils on this map is based on 1, studies of about a dozen samples collected in Africa by Homer L. Shantz, and 2, deductions from the known relationships of climate, native vegetation, and topography to soils, as determined by studies made in the US and Europe. And from the relation of climate, vegetation, and topography to the soils of those localities in Africa, whose soil character has been definitely determined. So it needs a copy editor, but the basic idea is this. He sampled soils in Africa, found locations in the US for which they had also sampled those soils, understood the vegetation and climate that was connected to those, and then created a map of the entire African continent that was depicted using the US and Europe as a proxy. So this isn't mapped explicitly, it's mapped by inference. Thus, as early as 1923, the landscape of the US and Europe were already being used as proxies for vast territories that were formidable in scale. In a post-World War I moment, it's worth noting the colonial mindset here at work. Rebuilding nations and war-torn landscapes was done through the introduction of US and European vegetation, particularly crops, that could seemingly thrive based on these proxy relationships. Clement's own words describe such a use of the indicator concept better than I could, calling it a, quote, scientific reconnaissance, with all the militaristic connotations intact. Landscape part 2, landscape indicators. Okay, now this is actually where my book project starts with this episode. We're gonna jump ahead to the 1950s, and we're gonna explore something I like to call the Cold War flower bed. Does anyone know this space? Well, some of you in a second. Okay. Rear Window, directed by Alfred Hitchcock in 1954, follows the photographer L.B. Jeffries after a car accident leaves him with a severely broken leg. He's confined to a wheelchair and to his apartment. From a limited vantage point, he engages in casual voyeurism and covertly observes his neighbors as they enact their daily patterns. Theorists who explore the relationship between film and architecture love Rear Window. There's many, many articles about it. And it's often cited as an example of urban voyeurism, spatial surveillance, or how architecture can frame social relationships, the windows acting as lenses into private lives. Timely to the Cold War context of this film, it's also seen as an example of how post-war urban life contained both proximity and alienation. And thinking again about proxies, one does not truly know their neighbors, or importantly, what lurks beneath their surface. This is kind of high McCarthyism, right? You might have a red heart. But for me, it's not Jeff the voyeur that I'm interested in. It's Jeff the photographer. Jeff's story takes a dark turn when he suspects that his neighbor, Mr. Thornwald, has murdered and dismembered his wife. Not Jeff's wife, Mrs. Thornwald, murdered and dismembered. And Thornwald embodies many qualities of Cold War geopolitics, as I understand them. Thornwald is a remote, inaccessible, and unknowable adversary. Here, he's represented as a single glowing cigarette in an otherwise dark room, the kind of proverbial mid-century black box. Okay? But along with his girlfriend and his nurse, Stella, Jeff uses photographic analysis to decipher vegetation in his backyard to get to the heart of the murder. They deduce that something sinister is hidden beneath the soil surface, the presence of which would confirm their suspicions of murder. And I'm just going to play a 1-minute clip, which is kind of the crucial scene for this.
Lisa, back there on that shelf, a little yellow box, you see it?
Top one?
Right on top, yeah. Bring it, and bring me the viewer. And just give me that. And these are about 2 weeks old. We'll wait till something else beside leg guard. Which one?
What are you looking for?
There's something, and if I'm right, I think I've solved a murder.
Mrs. Thorne?
No. The dog. I think I know why Thorwald killed that dog. Here, now you take a look and tell me what you see. Now take it down. Now look again. Now take it down. You see?
It's just a picture of the backyard. That's all.
One important change. Those flowers in Thorwald's pet flower bed.
You mean where the dog was sniffing around?
When the dog was digging. Now look at those flowers. Look, right, those 2 yellow zinnias in this end aren't as tall as they were. Now, since when do flowers grow shorter in 2 weeks?
There's something buried there. Mrs. Thorwald.
Mrs. Thornwald. Okay, yellow zinnias. One important change. Much like Shantz and Clements, Jeff uses photography as a kind of before and after form of analysis to see how a landscape changes with time, the difference reflecting a meaningful change in the land or something happening sinister below the surface. And similarly, Jeff uses botanical knowledge to decipher what might be lying beneath the surface. His knowledge of yellow zinnias. Now, of course, the botanical knowledge deployed in this case is quite rudimentary, simply stating that these flowers do not grow shorter in 2 weeks. But it is a sensitivity to plant behavior, plant temporality, and plant growth stages. Notably, a sensitivity that Jeff's partners don't initially share. He has to kind of train their observation to see the plants as indicators. At first, they are unable to read them as indicators. Okay, so for me, Rear Window distills important aspects of a Cold War epistemology in this case. First, it assumes an inaccessible and unknowable adversary, whose actions must be deciphered through proxies and indicators. 2, it assumes a remote landscape that can only be accessed from afar using other media, in this case and in many other cases through long lens photography. And 3, it assumes that knowledge of the natural world, such as plant behavior, can be used as evidence for what's below the soil, and that what is below the soil will communicate sinister intentions. It uses the landscape, a flower bed in this case, such as it is, as an information source. And then lastly, and this is not in the clip I showed, these types of proxies and indicators provide enough information, enough evidence of an adversary's actions and intent to warrant direct aggressions against that adversary. So in Rear Window, this is a crucial moment. The vegetal analysis scene is the moment at which they decide to act. Previously, they're contained within Jeff's apartment. After this moment of photographic analysis, Lisa's next move is to invade the apartment of Mr. Thornwald. Okay, analogous areas 2. A very similar process of landscape sense-making was present in a number of projects from the 1950s and 1960s, where aerial photographic reconnaissance was given meaning through botanical insights. Over a period of 20 or 30 years, photographic intelligence officers and ecologists mutually supported each other's work and mutually influenced how each of these disciplines evolved. with photo interpretation becoming very vegetal and ecological analysis becoming very aerial, which ultimately results in the interest of environmental remote sensing, that becoming a scale and a worldview that's relevant to ecological analysis. These and numerous sites in North America were used as environmental proxies for locations within the Sino-Soviet bloc. And this is just a quick animation I did of analyzing kind of hundreds of government reports, classified reports, of them using locations in the US as vegetal surrogates for these denied territories. So for instance, in many classified documents, locations within politically inaccessible areas are simultaneously labeled with their North American proxy sites. So here's the Ukraine, but if we zoom in a little bit, are we looking at the Ukraine or Minnesota, Montana, North Dakota? This is, which one is this? This is probably either 1947 or 1952. This one is definitely from 47, and it makes the case much more boldly. Just here's a map of China. Tibet is New Mexico. We've got Kansas, Colorado. Hunan is Kentucky. Gabe. Okay, so I have a number of case studies like this, and I'm just going to step through some of these slides because this is a project that we're going to see here that I present quite often publicly. But the short idea is this, that military intelligence officers are funding and collaborating with botanists and ecologists. The relationship to Frederick Clements and his colleagues is not light, it's quite strong. These are Clements' students and people he co-authored books with. They view the world from a polar point of view, separated as east and west initially. But then, through studies of geology, climate, and vegetation, they understand the kind of correspondence of zones between North America and the Sino-Soviet bloc. And with these, established test sites in North America in which to conduct analysis that could be applied for creating knowledge about the landscape that they don't have direct access to. So they identified these sites first by flowing reconnaissance missions over the North American landscape. This is in Canada. This is St. James Bay. Once they've identified species in these photographs, they then go and conduct field work. And when they get to the ground, they confirm that the species they identified were indeed accurate, and then they confirm what type of ground these species cover. So is it moist? Is it muddy? Is it dry? Could you put a tank over it? Could you put boots over it? Could you dig out minerals that you would need for a runway? They developed what they then called terrain information. We get this knowledge through other means now, but at the time, it was through this highly indicator type approach. Here we can just see some more of the photographic evidence. And then they would do a similar study from afar. So here's the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, which was the previous site of James Bay, was seen as a proxy for this site. So they would analyze aerial images flown illegally over the Kamchatka Peninsula and try to decipher if they were to invade where they could put boots on the ground. Jason and I were talking about archival work earlier. I sometimes do this kind of sinister trick on myself where I make these like archival deep fakes, which is what's the document I wish I could find when I got to College Park and was digging around. And it's one like this that tries to lay out the actual process of this whole thing of using proxies on proxies. And what we find is the whole thing of photo reading, interpretation, and then applying it to a remote location actually mirrors the training pattern that we use now for training pattern recognition algorithms, machine learning, and all the rest of it. So that's something I'm also working on, but I don't talk about a lot here today. Anyway, so just very quickly back to Jeff and his camera. How does Jeff get these skills? How did he learn to combine remote photography, image analysis, and plant indicators into a mode of forensic inquiry? Well, this photo on the back wall here might give us some evidence. What we learn in the film from Jeff's friend, Tom Doyle, who stops by, who's a detective, is that both Tom and Jeff served together in the Army Air Corps during World War II. And in fact, Jeff flew photo reconnaissance missions over enemy territory. So his facility with a camera, and specifically as a photojournalist, comes from the fact that he was actually a photo intelligence officer. I bring that up. I'm giving it a shot. I was on the fence about this. Right? I don't know. Okay. Fail. Okay. Why is this important? Okay, so I want to show that this is kind of important for my larger argument. I want to show that at this particular historical moment, within the context of military intelligence, a desire for information of the adversary takes both of these techniques, the idea of the aerial analog and the plant indicator, and combine, from natural science, and turns them collectively into a form of reconnaissance. But at the same time, these techniques are occurring during a post-war cultural moment where nothing was as it seemed, where every surface concealed something deeper, and where everything was seen as a stand-in for something else. So, from proxy wars to Manchurian candidates, to Freudian and Jungian symbols, to Marxian commodity fetishes, the world appeared as a surface manifestation, as an indicator of something else, something latent. And therefore, the pivotal moment in this film could take the form that it did, because it would make sense to an audience who was already viewing the world in this way. So for the last moment, I want someone else to back me up on this point. So I chose Claude Lévi-Strauss as a credible witness. And we're saying from tableau physique to the tableau vivant that Claude Lévi-Strauss presents to us in 1955. Several years ago, I found in his writing a bit of a vindication for this moment, that proxies, stand-ins, and indicators were important aspects of Cold War epistemology, connecting numerous aspects of environmental sense-making that drew a thread between natural sciences and everyday life. Writing in 55, Lévi-Strauss described the similarity between plants, geology, Marxism, and psychoanalysis, distilling the proxy-like qualities of each in a paragraph I couldn't have written better than myself. He offers what he calls a tableau vivant of related ideas, and fitting for my argument, he begins with a hypothetical landscape. Every landscape, he writes, offers at first glance an immense disorder, which may be sorted out however so we please. For Lévi-Strauss, geology is an important and necessary starting point for this sense-making. Through a surface trace, such as a pale line, we can infer a history of deep-time physical processes that brought this very landscape to its current state. I can detect, he writes, that where there is now nothing but an arid waste, was once an ocean flowing together. I think I got that wrong. Such traces are most clearly embodied in the presence of different plant species, and he continues his exploration highlighting the indicative potential of vegetal life. Quote, on one side and the other of a hidden crevice, we find two green plants of different species. Each has chosen the soil which suits it, and we realize that within the rock are two ammonites, one of which has involutions less complex than the other. We glimpse a difference of many thousands of years. Time and space suddenly commingle. The living diversity of that moment juxtaposes one age and the other and perpetuates them. Now, I'm not going to read the whole section as much as I'd like to, but Strauss expands his tableau vivant to include Freudian psychoanalysis and Marxian structuralism, and arrives at a final reflection about the resemblances between these different ways of knowing the world and of knowing humankind. At a different level of reality, he continues, Marxism seemed to me to proceed in the same way as geology and psychoanalysis. All three showed that understanding consists in the reduction of one type of reality to another. The true reality is never the most obvious of realities, and that its nature is already apparent in the care which it takes to evade our detection. Okay, so with these kind of ideas of analogs, indicators, and subsurfaces, I've perhaps coarsely, you can push back on these categories and where I've slotted the guests, but this is rough. We're going to have conversations with our 9 guests and our 3 moderators. And the kind of rough format of this will be that our 3 guests and the moderators will join us at the table at the top of the panel. Each presenter will share some of their work and their thoughts and ideas for 20 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation for another 20 minutes amongst the moderator, the panelists, and the audience. Thank you so much to our guests for joining us. I'm really excited to have you all here, and thank you for all of you in attendance for your questions and attention. Right.